They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But for Alara Vance, it wasn't about revenge. It was about survival. When her husband of 10 years, Marcus, threw her out with nothing but a used suitcase and a 10-year-old car, he told her she was nothing. He said she'd be begging at his door within a month. He was wrong. The next time Marcus saw his ex-wife, she wasn't begging. She was stepping off a $70 million Gulfstream G700, standing beside a man who could buy and sell his entire world on a whim. This is the story of how she went from divorced and destitute to dominant. The silence in the penthouse was loud. It was a cold, sterile silence, the kind that only exists in spaces designed by minimalist architects and inhabited by emotionally bankrupt people. Alara Vance, soon to be just Alara, stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows watching the San Francisco fog swallow the Golden Gate Bridge. It felt symbolic. "So that's it," she said, her voice a dry rasp. She didn't turn around. Marcus Reed, her husband of a decade, sighed. It was a sound of pure exasperation, the kind one makes when a business deal is taking too long to close. He was standing by the bar adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke Brioni suit. "Alara, don't be dramatic. It's just a signature." "Just a signature," she repeated, the words tasting like ash. 10 years of my life, my career, well, everything, all for just a signature. "I provided you with a very comfortable life," Marcus snapped, his polished veneer cracking. "You wanted for nothing. That art history degree from Brown was useless, and you know it. I gave you a purpose. I gave you this." He gestured to the multi-million-dollar view, the custom Italian furniture, the life he had built, while she... What had she done? Planned his dinners, hosted his clients, picked out his ties. She had done all that and more. She had been his sounding board, his unpaid therapist, his social strategist, and his buffer against the world. She had given up a promising curator position at a Boston gallery to follow him to California for his big break at a venture capital firm, a break that she now realized she had helped engineer. "And now you're giving it to Chloe," Alara said. It wasn't a question. Marcus froze. He hadn't thought she knew the name. He'd been sloppy, leaving a hotel receipt from the St. Regis in his travel bag. Chloe, 24 years old, an influencer, with plastic curves and a vacant smile. "She has nothing to do with this," he lied poorly. "She has everything to do with this," Alara said, finally turning. Her eyes, usually a warm hazel, were like polished stones. "You're trading me in for a newer model, Marcus. It's the most cliché thing you've ever done. But the one thing you didn't count on is this: I will sign your papers." She walked over to the glass desk. The divorce settlement lay there, a thick, insulting stack of paper. His lawyers had been brutal. The prenuptial agreement, which she'd signed in good faith, was ironclad. She would get her car, a 2014 Honda Civic, her personal effects, and a one-time transitional payment of $25,000. In Pacific Heights, that was barely 3 months' rent. "You're making a mistake, Alara," he said, and for a second she heard a flicker of fear. Not of losing her, but of the inconvenience. "You'll be back. You're not cut out for the real world." "That's the difference between you and me, Marcus. You think this," she motioned to the penthouse, "is the real world. I think it's a cage, a very beautiful, very empty cage." She picked up the expensive gold-plated pen. She didn't just sign her name, she slashed it across the dotted line. Alara Vance. She left the pen on the desk, walked into the massive bedroom, and grabbed the one suitcase she had pre-packed. It contained 3 pairs of jeans, a few sweaters, her running shoes, and a faded copy of The Odyssey. As she walked to the private elevator, Marcus blocked her path. "What about your art, your books, your clothes?" "Keep them," she said, her voice hollow. "Or give them to Chloe. I'm sure she'd love to play dress-up in my life." He flinched. "Alara, wait. The $25,000. I'll have my bank wire it." "Don't bother," she said, cutting him off. "I don't want your guilt money." "Then you'll have nothing," he yelled, his face turning an ugly shade of red. "I have my name," she said, pressing the elevator button. "And starting today, that's more than you have." The polished brass doors slid shut, reflecting Marcus's stunned, furious face. Ilara walked through the marble lobby, ignoring the concierge's polite nod. She got into her scuffed-up Honda, the engine turning over with a reluctant cough. She didn't know where she was going. She just drove. She crossed the Golden Gate Bridge, the fog so thick it was like driving through a cloud. She drove until the sun came up, and then she drove some more, the check engine light, a tiny angry orange eye on her dashboard. She drove north away from the life she knew with $400 in her checking account and a past that was burning her to the ground. Ilara drove for 2 days, fueled by stale gas station coffee and a searing, hollow rage. She ended up in Napa Valley, not in the glamorous tourist trap parts, but in the gritty, working-class back-end town of St. Helena. Her car finally gave out, the transmission dying with a metallic shriek right in front of a small, greasy spoon diner called the Napa Nook. It was a sign. A miserable, pathetic sign. She sold the car to a scrapyard for $500. With just under $1,000 to her name, she found a room for rent above a bakery, a tiny, slanted-roof attic space that smelled perpetually of yeast and stale sugar. It cost $600 a month cash. She was left with almost nothing. The real world, as Marcus called it, was cold and sharp. On her 3rd day, she walked into the Napa Nook. It was the opposite of the fine dining establishments she used to frequent. The vinyl on the booths was cracked, and the air was thick with the smell of frying bacon and burnt coffee. A woman with a pencil-thin face and a name tag that read Mavis looked her up and down. "We're not hiring for the front." "Pardon?" Ilara asked, her voice still holding a trace of its former polished life. "Your hands," Mavis said, pointing with her pen. "Soft, manicured. You've never worked a day in your life. I need a dishwasher. Can you handle that, or did you come in here to ask for directions to the Auberge du Soleil?" Ilara looked at her own hands. Marcus had always complimented them, said they were an aristocrat's hands. She curled them into fists. "I can wash dishes." Mavis stared at her for a long, uncomfortable moment. "Fine. $14 an hour. You start now. Name's Lara." "It's Ilara." "It's Lara now." Mavis cut her off. "We've already got an Elena. Causes confusion. The aprons are in the back." For the next 4 weeks, Lara lived in a steaming hell. She scrubbed burnt egg off plates until her aristocrat's hands were raw red and cracked. Her back ached. Her feet throbbed. She learned to move fast to stay out of the way of the line cooks and to ignore the condescending smirks from the career waitresses. She learned humility in a way she never had before. She was invisible. She was no one. And in a strange way, it was liberating. No one here cared who her husband was, what she was wearing, or what useless degree she held. They just cared if she was fast enough. One evening, after a brutal 12-hour double shift, she was sitting in the alley behind the diner, soaking her feet in a bucket of ice water. "Tough one, huh?" Ilara looked up. It was Sarah, one of the younger waitresses, smoking a cigarette. Sarah had sharp, intelligent eyes and a tattoo of a hummingbird on her wrist. "You could say that," Ilara sighed, wincing as she moved her blistered heel. Sarah took a long drag and exhaled. "Mavis is a dragon, but she's fair. You're still here. Most of the pretty ones quit after a day." "I'm not pretty," Ilara said, the words coming out before she could stop them. "Not anymore." "Honey," Sarah said, crouching down. "That's just grime. It washes off. You're different. You talk like one of them from the tasting rooms up on the hill. What's your story?" Ilara was about to give the canned fresh start speech, but something in Sarah's no-nonsense gaze made her stop. "My husband left me. Took everything." Sarah nodded, not with pity but with recognition. "Welcome to the club. My ex took my car and my credit. At least you're just washing dishes. I'm washing and serving. The tips are terrible this time of year." She put out her cigarette. Listen, I'm working a side gig tonight. A catering event up at one of the big estates. It's $25 an hour under the table. They need extra servers. You look like you can hold a tray. You in. Ilara's entire being screamed no. The thought of putting on a uniform of serving people like Marcus and his friends was nauseating. I don't know. It's $25 an hour, Lara, Sarah said, her voice firm. That's almost 2 of Mavis's hours. You're renting that attic from Paolo, right? He's a sweet old guy, but he'll kick you to the curb if you're a day late. You need the money. She was right. Ilara needed the money. Okay, Ilara said, her voice stronger. I'm in. Good. Be at the corner of Main and Charter at 5 p.m. Wear all black. And for God's sake, file down those broken nails. You look like you've been clawing your way out of a grave. Feels like it, Ilara muttered as Sarah walked away. You'll be fine, Sarah called over her shoulder. Just smile, don't talk, and whatever you do, don't spill anything on the guests, especially not at the Thorne estate. Ilara's blood ran cold. The Thorne estate. She knew that name. Anyone with an art history degree knew that name. Julian Thorne, the reclusive, eccentric billionaire art collector. He was a myth, a ghost who owned more private art than some small countries. She was going from scrubbing eggs at the Napa Nook to serving champagne in one of the most important private art collections in the world. The Thorne estate wasn't just a house, it was a compound. Perched high on a hill, it was invisible from the main road, hidden by a dense forest of ancient oaks and imported Italian cypress trees. The catering van passed through 3 separate security checkpoints before winding its way up a long gravel drive. Ilara, dressed in a stiff, poorly fitting black shirt and trousers, felt her old life rush back to her. This was the world she used to inhabit, albeit as a guest, not as the help. Okay, newbies, the catering manager, a stressed-out man named Damien, barked as the van stopped. Listen up, you don't look at the guests. You don't speak to the guests. You definitely do not speak to Mr. Thorne. He doesn't like people. Your job is to be invisible. A hand that appears with a drink, a hand that takes an empty glass. Got it. You are wallpaper. Yes, chef, the group murmured. They were bustled through a massive industrial-sized kitchen and given their assignments. Ilara and Sarah were tasked with passing champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Just follow my lead, Sarah whispered, grabbing a silver tray. And try not to look terrified. They can smell fear. Ilara stepped out into the main gallery, and her breath caught. It wasn't a room, it was a museum. The walls were lined with art that shouldn't be here, art she had only ever seen in textbooks. A small, moody Turner. A stark, emotional Rothko. And there, over the massive limestone fireplace, was a painting that made her heart stop. My God, she whispered. What? Sarah hissed, nudging her. Tray up. That's... Ilara couldn't look away. That's the girl with the amber locket. It's a Vermeer. It's been missing since 1945. Stolen from a private collection in Poland. Sarah's eyes went wide. Lara, shut up. You're gonna get us fired. It's just a painting. Pass the tiny quiches. Ilara forced herself to move, but her mind was racing. The Vermeer was real. She could tell from 20 feet away. The way the light hit the subject's face, the signature use of ultramarine. It was legitimate. Julian Thorne didn't just collect art. He possessed history. For 2 hours, Ilara was the perfect wallpaper. She glided through the minimalist rooms, offering champagne with a polite, vacant smile. The guests were the same people she had known in San Francisco, just with more money. Tech barons, old money heirs, and venture capitalists. They all had the same predatory brightness in their eyes. She saw Julian Thorne only once. He was not what she expected. He wasn't a young, slick CEO. He was an older man, perhaps in his late 60s, with a shock of white hair and the most intelligent, piercing blue eyes she had ever seen. He was dressed simply in a dark cashmere sweater and trousers, and he looked utterly bored by his own party. He was standing alone, staring at the Vermeer, when a group of men in sharp suits cornered him. Alara drifted closer, her tray held high, pretending to offer drinks to a nearby couple. "And that's why the Devlamink is a guaranteed investment, Julian," one of the men, a slick art dealer named Antoine, was saying. "It's a pivotal piece from his Fauvist period, and at $50 million it's a steal. The provenance is flawless." "Flawless." Julian Thorne repeated, his voice a low gravel. "You said the same thing about the Picasso you tried to sell me last year, Antoine. The one my own experts later found was a brilliant forgery from the 70s. "A misunderstanding, Julian, I assure you," Antoine said, sweating slightly. "This piece. This is different. It's authenticated by the highest authorities." The men moved toward a smaller adjacent room which Alara hadn't noticed. It was a private viewing gallery. There on an easel under a single spotlight was a painting. It was a vibrant, chaotic landscape, all screaming reds and swirling blues. A Vlaminck. Alara's eyes narrowed. She had seen this piece before, or rather a photo of it. It had been in the catalog for her graduate thesis, "Great Fakes, the Art of the Master Forger." "Gentlemen," Antoine said, gesturing grandly, "I present Le Pont de Chateau." The men murmured in appreciation. Julian Thorne just stared, his expression unreadable. Alara watched, her heart hammering. She was just wallpaper. She should walk away. But as she looked at the painting, her art historian's brain took over. It was good. It was very good. But it was wrong. The signature was just a little too clean. The canvas visible at the edge had a synthetic tightness that wasn't right for the period, and the use of cerulean blue in the sky. Vlaminck was known for hating that pigment. He called it a paint for bankers' wives. Antoine was pulling out a contract. "If you'll just sign, Julian, we can have it transported to your vault in Geneva by morning." Julian Thorne reached for the pen. "Don't." The word was out of her mouth before she could stop it. It was quiet, but it cut through the room like a knife. Everyone froze. Antoine turned his face a mask of fury. "Who the hell are you?" Damien, the catering manager, was already rushing over, his face pale. "I am so sorry, Mr. Thorne. So sorry. She's new. I asked her a question." Julian Thorne said, his voice quiet but stopping Damien in his tracks. He turned his piercing blue eyes on Alara. She was still holding her silver tray. "You said, 'Don't,'" he said. "Why?" Alara's hands were shaking so hard the champagne flutes were rattling. This was it. This was the end of her $25 an hour job. This was probably the end of her life in St. Helena. She put the tray down on a nearby table. She took a deep breath, and she walked up to the painting. "Because it's a fake," Alara said. The silence that followed Alara's declaration was absolute. Antoine, the art dealer, was the first to break it with a laugh that was sharp and brittle. A fake," he sneered, looking at her black and white uniform. "And what exactly are your qualifications, sweetheart? Did you take a Modern Art 101 class at the local community college?" Damien, the catering manager, looked like he was about to have a heart attack. "Mr. Thorne, please, I'll have her removed immediately. She's delusional." "Wait." Julian Thorne's voice was calm, but it carried an authority that silenced everyone. He hadn't taken his eyes off Alara. "She made an accusation. I want to hear the evidence." "You," he said, pointing a long, elegant finger at her. "Explain." Alara's heart was a drum against her ribs, but the moment she focused on the canvas, the fear melted away. This was her world. This was the one thing Marcus had never been able to touch, the one part of her that was still hers. "Start with the pigment," she said, her voice clear and steady. She stepped closer to the painting, her old curator's instincts taking over. "This painting is dated 1905. Vlaminck, at this point in his Fauvist period, was using a very specific raw palette directly from the tube. He famously detested pre-mixed, artificial colors. The sky here," she gestured, "is saturated with cerulean blue. Vlaminck loathed cerulean. He wrote about it in a letter to Derain in 1906, calling it a weak and bourgeois color." Julian Thorne's eyebrows shot up. Antoine's face had gone from red to a sickly pale. Furthermore, Ilara continued, her confidence growing, look at the brushwork on the bridge. She pointed. It's hesitant. Vlaminck was never hesitant. He was an anarchist. He attacked the canvas. This is the work of someone copying his style, not inhabiting it. They're trying to replicate the savage strokes, but they're doing it carefully. It's a contradiction. She wasn't finished. But the real giveaway, it's the canvas. Look at the weave. She gestured to the edge where the canvas was tacked. It's too perfect. It's a modern synthetic blend linen. In 1905, he would have been using a coarser, hand-stretched jute or hemp canvas, and it would have had visible imperfections. This was probably made in a factory in the last 20 years. She turned from the painting and faced Julian Thorne. This isn't Le Pont de Chateau. It's a very, very good try, but it's a forgery. A brilliant one, but a forgery nonetheless. You should have your own experts check the carbon dating on the paint pigments. I guarantee you'll find titanium white, which wasn't commercially available in this form until the 1920s. The room was completely still. Antoine was staring at Ilara as if she had just grown a second head. Julian Thorne stared at the painting, then at Ilara, then back at the painting. A slow, thin smile spread across his face. It was a genuinely amused, wolfish smile. Antoine, he said, his voice dangerously soft, you have 30 seconds to get off my property, and if my lawyers ever hear your name again, it will be in a courtroom. Julian, listen to me, Antoine sputtered. Are you going to believe her? A waitress over me. The waitress, Mr. Thorne said, just saved me $50 million, and she did it without a financial stake in the outcome. You, on the other hand, and he gestured to two large stone-faced security guards who had appeared in the doorway. Gentlemen, please escort Mr. Antoine to his car, and make sure he doesn't take any of the tiny quiches with him. Antoine was dragged out, protesting the entire time. The remaining guests in the room began to talk in hushed, excited whispers. The party was over. Ilara stood there, suddenly aware of her uniform, of her chapped hands, of the fact that she had just torpedoed a $50 million deal. She began to back away, her job for the night clearly finished. And where do you think you're going? Thorne's voice stopped her. She turned. I'm sorry, Mr. Thorne. I should get back to the kitchen. I don't think so, he said. He walked over to her. He was tall and he smelled faintly of old books and expensive cologne. I've had experts from the Getty, the Met, and the Louvre on my payroll. None of them have ever been as concise, as passionate, or as correct in such a short amount of time. He looked at her, truly saw her for the first time. He saw the intelligence behind the exhaustion in her eyes. You, he said, are wasted here. Who are you? My name is Ilara Vance. I used to be a wife, a socialite, a joke. I used to be an art historian. No, Julian Thorne said, a strange light in his eyes. You are an art historian. You're just currently in between assignments. He pulled a simple, elegant business card from his pocket. My personal assistant, Ms. Davies, will call the catering company and inform them that you are indisposed. You and I, Ms. Vance, have a great deal to discuss, starting with that Vermeer. Ilara looked at Sarah, who was hiding behind a potted palm, giving her a frantic thumbs up. Okay, Ilara said. Good, Thorne said, gesturing for her to follow him up a winding glass staircase. First, let's get you a real drink, and then you're going to tell me everything you know about the art of forgery. As she followed him, she passed a massive gilded mirror. She caught her reflection. She was Laura, the dishwasher, in a baggy black uniform. But for the first time in almost a year, the woman staring back at her looked like Ilara Vance. Ilara didn't go back to the attic room above the bakery. She didn't go back to the Napa Nook. She spent the next 6 hours in Julian Thorne's private library, a 2-story rotunda filled with first-edition books, and she suspected more missing art. They drank a 1982 Chateau Margaux. They talked about art, about history, about the soulless transactional nature of the modern art market. He was fascinated by her knowledge not just of the art, but of the history behind it, the provenance, the wars, the passions that drove artists to create. She told him her story. Not the long, self-pitying version, but the facts. The degree from Brown, the curator job she gave up, the divorce, the penthouse in Pacific Heights, the $25,000 she'd refused. Julian Thorne listened, his steepled fingers a V in front of his face. He was a man who understood value, and he recognized with a collector's thrill that he had just stumbled upon something priceless. Marcus Reed, he mused, swirling the wine in his glass. I know the name. A small-time VC. Thinks he's a shark, but he's swimming in a goldfish bowl. He's a fool. He didn't just trade you in. He traded a masterpiece for a print. A very, very cheap print. He thought I was useless, Ilara said, the wine warming her. He said my degree was a wall decoration. Then he's an idiot, Thorne said simply. People like Antoine. They're parasites. They thrive on the ignorance of new money. They turn beauty into a commodity. They are, in short, my least favorite people in the world. He leaned forward, his blue eyes intense. I've been wanting to start a new project, Ms. Vance. A nonprofit. A foundation. Not one that just buys art, but one that protects it. A foundation dedicated to authenticating major works, to hunting down forgeries, and to using all my resources to repatriate art stolen by the Nazis and other regimes. He paused. I have the money. I have the power. But I don't have the time and I don't have the eye. I need someone to run it. Someone with unimpeachable knowledge, a passion for the truth, and a certain amount of righteous anger. He smiled. I need a director, a president. I need you. Ilara stared at him. Mr. Thorne, I'm a dishwasher. You were a dishwasher, he corrected. As of 2 hours ago, I'm offering you a new position. President of the Thorne Vance Foundation. We'll call it the Vance Foundation. It has a better ring to it. Your salary will be, let's say, 5 times what your husband made. You'll have an unlimited budget for research, travel, and acquisitions. You'll have my lawyers, my security, and my full support. Your only job is to be right, and to be ruthless. Ilara was speechless. It was insane. It was a dream. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Julian said, topping off her glass. Your first assignment will be to go through my entire collection and tell me what's fake. I suspect after Antoine I have a few more errors in judgment. Ilara looked at the fire, at the Vermeer on the wall, at the new life spinning out in front of her. The fear was gone. The humiliation was gone. All that was left was a sharp, clear-minded purpose. Yes, she said. Mr. Thorne, yes, I accept. Excellent. You'll start tomorrow. My assistant will arrange for a new everything. Clothes, a car, a place to live. I have a guest house on the property you can use. Thank you, Ilara said, the words feeling small. But if I'm going to run this foundation, I can't be kept. I'll find my own place, and I'll need to go back to my room to get my things. Julian Thorne nodded, his respect for her visibly growing. Of course. My driver will take you. But, Ilara... Yes. Don't take too long. We have a lot of fakes to find. Ilara left the estate at 4 a.m., not in a catering van, but in the back of a black Mercedes Maybach. She collected her small bag from the attic room, leaving a month's rent and a thank-you note for Paolo. She left a separate note for Sarah with $500 in cash and the simple message, "You were right. It was good money. Thank you. E.V." For the next 6 months, Ilara Vance disappeared. She wasn't Lara the dishwasher or Ilara the ex-wife. She was E. Vance director. She dove into the work with a ferocious, single-minded focus. She flew to Zurich, to London, to Florence. She dismantled Julian's collection, finding 2 more high-level forgeries and a stolen antiquity that she immediately arranged to have returned to the Greek government, causing a minor international incident that Julian found hilarious. She wasn't just his employee. She became his partner, his protege. He taught her about business, about leverage, about how to wield power with the precision of a scalpel. She taught him about history, about beauty, about the soul of the things he owned. She changed. Her hands were still strong, but the grime was replaced by purpose. She cut her hair into a sharp, stylish bob. She traded her jeans for the sharp, elegant lines of designers like the Row and Loro Piana. She didn't look like Marcus's wife. She looked like her own woman. One afternoon, she was in Julian's office reviewing the plans for a new museum wing. "The San Francisco Art Gala is in 2 weeks, Julian said casually, not looking up from a document. "It's the biggest charity event of the year. All the sharks will be there." "I know," Alara said. "We're donating the authenticated Vlamink we just acquired to their auction." "Good. I want you to present it." "On stage, me?" "You are the director of the Vance Foundation," he said. "It's your job. Besides," he added, a glint in his eye, "I hear it's being held at the Fairmont. And your ex-husband's firm, Reed Capital, is a junior sponsor. I suspect he'll be there." Alara's fingers tightened on her pen. The Fairmont, the place where Marcus had proposed, the place where he'd held his first big client dinner. "I see," she said, her voice perfectly neutral. "We'll fly in that afternoon," Julian said. "The G700 is at your disposal. I'll be your +1. He finally looked up. "It's time, Alara. It's time for San Francisco to officially meet Ms. Vance." The Gulfstream G700 descended through the clouds over the San Francisco Bay, a silver needle stitching the sky. Alara sat in one of the plush cream-colored leather seats sipping a glass of water. She wasn't nervous. She was prepared. In 6 months, her entire world had shifted. She was no longer a victim. She was a general. The jet's cabin, quiet as a library and smelling of fresh flowers and rich leather, was a world away from the rattling Honda Civic she had driven out of this city. "Ready?" Julian Thorne asked from the seat opposite her. He was reading the Wall Street Journal, looking perfectly at ease. "I've handled rogue art dealers and repatriated a 12th century statue," Alara said with a small smile. "I think I can handle a party." "That's the spirit," he said, folding the paper. "Just remember, these people are all smoke and mirrors. You're the only one in that room who is truly, unequivocally real." They landed at SFO's private terminal far from the commercial chaos. A black, armored Rolls-Royce Cullinan waited for them on the tarmac. As Alara stepped out of the jet, the cool, foggy air of her old city hit her. It didn't feel like home. It felt like a battlefield. They were driven to the Fairmont Hotel not as guests, but as patrons. They were given the presidential suite, which was really just a staging area for Alara to get ready. A team of stylists hired by Julian was waiting. "Ms. Vance, a pleasure," a woman with a chic French accent said. "I have options." The options were a rack of haute couture gowns. Alara bypassed the safe black and the flashy red. Her eyes landed on a dress in a deep sapphire blue. It was an Oscar de la Renta, a stunning off-the-shoulder column of silk that was both elegant and armor-like. "That one," she said. When she was ready, she looked at herself in the full-length mirror. The woman looking back was a stranger. Her hair was swept up in an elegant chignon. Around her neck, on loan from Julian's private collection, was a necklace of antique diamonds that had once belonged to a Russian royal. She was breathtaking, but more than that, she looked powerful. "Well," Julian said, standing in the doorway dressed in a flawless tuxedo, "Vermeer would have wanted to paint you." "How do I look?" she asked. "You look," he said, offering his arm, "like you own the place." "Good," Alara said, taking his arm, "because tonight I just might." The grand ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel was not merely a room. It was an arena. This was the beating heart of San Francisco's old and new money, a glittering shark tank where fortunes were made, alliances were broken, and reputations were forged or annihilated over canapes and cocktails. The air was a heavy perfume of legacy desperation and $1,000-a-bottle champagne. And tonight Marcus Reed felt he was its master. He stood near the double-arched entrance, a strategic position holding a flute of champagne like a trophy. His bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo felt like a second skin. On his arm, his new fiancée Chloe was a splash of garish red in a sea of tasteful black and gold. Her dress was a herve léger so tight it looked vacuum-sealed, and she was already complaining about her feet. "Marcus, that's Harrison Grant," Chloe hissed in his ear, her voice a sharp-edged whisper. "He runs the biggest tech fund in the valley. Introduce me." "In a minute, darling," Marcus said, his smile wide and practiced. He'd just secured a laugh from a city supervisor. "Networking is a hunt, not a race. You have to let them come to you." He felt a surge of pure, uncut confidence. This was his city, his crowd. He had shed his past, the quiet, academic, boring wife, and had upgraded. Chloe was young, ambitious, and understood that life was a transaction. He was a king in his castle, and tonight the gala was his coronation as one of the city's new elite. He was in the middle of telling a joke to a rival VC when the energy in the ballroom shifted. It wasn't a sound. It was a change in pressure, a collective intake of breath. The high-pitched chatter near the grand staircase didn't just quiet down, it evaporated. "What is it?" Chloe asked, standing on her toes, craning her neck. The live quartet, which had been playing a breezy Vivaldi, faltered and went silent. The only sound was the clicking of heels on marble. The announcer at the door, a man with a voice trained to sound bored by billionaires, suddenly sounded neither. His voice boomed into the microphone, filled with a reverence that was so rare it was shocking. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer called, his voice cracking slightly with excitement, "please welcome Mr. Julian Thorne." A wave of whispers and gasps washed over the room. Julian Thorne. Here Thorne didn't attend events. He was the event. People physically turned, a sea of faces drawn to the top of the stairs. Marcus felt a thrill. Thorne. If he could just get 30 seconds. "And his guest?" The announcer added, his voice rising to a crescendo, as if he couldn't believe the name on his card. "Ms. Ilara Vance." The name hit Marcus Reed like a physical blow. It was as if the air had been sucked from his lungs. Vance. Ilara Vance. He turned, a stupid, fixed smile still on his face. And then the smile dissolved. The champagne flute, the one he held like a scepter, slipped from his nerveless fingers. It didn't just drop. It shattered on the marble floor, the sound a tiny, sharp explosion in the sudden, echoing silence. He heard the name. Ilara Vance. It couldn't be. But it was. She stood at the top of the staircase, her hand resting lightly on the arm of the Julian Thorne. It was Ilara. But it wasn't his Ilara. The woman he had discarded, the woman he had called a wall decoration, was gone. In her place stood a queen. She was wearing a gown of deep sapphire blue silk that seemed to drink the light. It fell off one shoulder, a perfect column of impossible elegance. Around her throat was not a simple string of pearls, but a waterfall of antique diamonds, a necklace he recognized instinctively as royal. It was the kind of jewelry that started wars. Her hair, which she used to wear in a simple, practical bun, was swept up in a chignon so perfect it could have been sculpted by a Greek master. But it wasn't the dress or the diamonds or the billionaire on her arm that held the room captive. It was her bearing. She didn't look nervous. She didn't look impressed. She looked inevitable. She descended the staircase with a slow, deliberate grace, her eyes scanning the room not as a guest, but as a surveyor, as if she were deciding which parts of it were worth her time. "Marcus!" Chloe's voice was a shrill, ugly thing breaking the spell. "Marcus, who is that?" "Wait. Vance, as in your ex-wife." The waitress." Marcus couldn't speak. His throat was full of ash. He was frozen, a shard of glass from his own broken flute resting on the toe of his $2,000 shoe. He wasn't seeing Alara, his mousy academic wife. He was seeing Ms. Vance, a creature of terrifying power. He was seeing the woman he had thrown out with $25,000, and she was now wearing $25 million around her neck as if it were an afterthought. He had traded in a priceless, undiscovered masterpiece for a cheap, gaudy print, and the print was currently digging her acrylic nails into his arm. "My God!" Chloe whispered, her face pale with a mixture of envy and panic. She's with Julian Thorne. He's worth more than God. Why is she with him, Marcus? Why didn't you tell me she looked like that?" Alara and Julian reached the bottom of the stairs. The most powerful people in the room, the tech barons, the old money heirs, the politicians, parted like the Red Sea. They surged toward Alara, not Julian. She was the new sun, and they were all desperate planets seeking her orbit. Alara smiled a polite, measured smile as the mayor of San Francisco bowed to kiss her hand. She was a vision of grace, laughing lightly at something Julian whispered in her ear. And then she saw him. Her eyes, those warm hazel eyes he used to get lost in, swept across the room. They passed over the fawning crowds over the bar, and then they landed on him. For 1 second their gazes locked. Marcus felt a desperate, insane flicker of hope. She sees me. She remembers. And then Alara did the most brutal, devastating thing she could possibly have done. She gave him a small, polite nod. The kind of nod you give a valet who has brought your car. A nod of faint recognition and even fainter interest. Then her eyes dismissed him, sliding past him as if he were nothing more than a statue, and focused on the CEO of a major bank. That 1 second long dismissal was a public execution. He was nothing. He was less than nothing. He was a ghost. She looked right at us. Chloe hissed, her voice trembling with rage. She looked at us like we were nothing. Like we're the help. Marcus, do something. Don't you stand there looking like a fool. Go talk to her. People are starting to stare at us. Goaded, humiliated, and operating on pure blind panic. Marcus did the stupidest thing he could have done. He walked over. He pushed his way through the crowd, dragging a fuming Chloe behind him. He reached the small, powerful circle of light that surrounded Alara. "Alara," he said. His voice came out as a pathetic croak. He cleared his throat. "Alara." She turned. The small, intimate circle, Julian Thorne, the mayor, the bank CEO, turned with her. A half-dozen of the most powerful eyes in California were now on him. Alara's face was a mask of perfect, cool politeness. "Marcus, I'm surprised to see you here. I always found you preferred events with a lower barrier to entry." It was a scalpel disguised as a comment, a direct hit at his junior sponsor status. He flushed. I barely recognized you. You look incredible." "Thank you," she said, her voice as cool and smooth as the silk of her dress. "You look the same." The insult hung in the air, glittering as brightly as her diamonds. "This is," Marcus stammered, pulling Chloe forward. "This is my fiancée, Chloe. Chloe, this is Alara." Chloe, trying to regain some footing, forced a saccharine smile. "So nice to finally meet you. Marcus has told me nothing about you." "I'm sure he has," Alara said, her eyes giving Chloe a quick, appraising glance that took in the too-tight dress and the desperate eyes. "He was never one for appreciating history. He prefers new acquisitions. But one must always be so careful about the provenance." Before Marcus or Chloe could even process the multi-layered insult, Alara turned and placed a hand on Julian's arm. "And this, of course, is Julian Thorne. Julian, this is Marcus Reed. He used to manage my affairs." The ultimate demotion. From husband to manager. Julian Thorne, who had been observing the interaction with the detached amusement of a lion watching mice play, didn't even look at Marcus. His gaze didn't grace him. He smiled down at Alara. "Alara, my dear." Julian said, his voice a rich baritone that cut through the chatter. "Mr. Ellison and Senator Davies are waiting by the winter garden. They're anxious to discuss the repatriation of the Syrian artifacts. We really shouldn't keep them waiting." "You're right, of course, Julian," Elara said. She turned back to Marcus, her smile now just a polite memory. "Excuse us, Marcus. Chloe." She used Chloe's name, proving she had registered her, considered her, and dismissed her in the same breath. "It was illuminating, seeing you again. Do enjoy your evening." And with that, she and Julian Thorne turned and glided away. They didn't rush, they didn't look back, and the entire room's center of gravity, the mayor, the CEO, the power, the money, moved with them, leaving Marcus and Chloe standing in a cold, empty void. It was as if a light had been switched off. People were no longer looking at them. They were looking past them. She called me an acquisition," Chloe hissed, her face a blotchy red. "And you just stood there. You let her—" "Chloe, be quiet." Marcus mumbled, his face pale. "No, you told me she was nothing. You told me she was a sad little bookworm that," she pointed a shaking red-nailed finger, "is not nothing, Marcus. You're a fool." She ripped her arm from his. "I'm going to the powder room." But she didn't walk toward the restrooms. She walked toward the bar where the hedge fund manager Harrison Grant was standing. Later that evening, the gala's host took the stage. And now, to say a few words and present the centerpiece of our auction, please welcome the director of the newly formed and incredibly important Vance Foundation, Ms. Elara Vance. Marcus, who had been trying to get another drink from a bartender who was pointedly ignoring him, froze. Director, the Vance Foundation. Elara walked onto the stage. The spotlight hit her and the room fell into a reverent hush. She was not a guest. She was not a +1. She was the main event. "Good evening," she said. Her voice was clear, strong, and confident. It filled the entire vast ballroom. "My name is Elara Vance. For too long," she continued, "the art world has been a playground, not for patrons but for predators, people who value profit over truth, who see a signature but not the soul of the work. They trade in masterpieces as if they are mere commodities to be bought hidden or discarded when a newer, shinier model comes along." From the back of the room, Marcus felt every word as a physical blow. This wasn't a speech. It was his eulogy. "The Vance Foundation is not a charity," Elara declared, her voice ringing with passion. "It is a correction. We are not here to buy. We are here to validate, to repatriate, to restore. We are here to find the truth, to protect it, and to return it to the world. We are here to remind everyone that true value is not in what you own, but in what you protect, and that some things are not for sale." The room exploded. It wasn't polite applause. It was a thunderous, sustained, standing ovation. Marcus stood alone in the shadows, a ghost at his own funeral. He watched the woman he had called nothing command a room he had spent his entire life trying to enter. He saw Chloe across the room, laughing and slipping her phone number to Harrison Grant. He was ruined. He hadn't just made a mistake. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had committed an act of self-annihilation. He had thrown away a masterpiece, and he was left with the fakes. And the woman he had driven out of the city in a 10-year-old Honda had just returned and taken the entire city from him. Elara Vance never looked back. Her return wasn't for revenge. It was a byproduct of her own incredible rise. She didn't come back to show Marcus what he had lost. She came back to show the world what she had found herself. Marcus, as it turned out, was audited 6 months later. His new fiancée had been a corporate spy for a rival firm. He lost his job, his reputation, and his penthouse. Elara's story teaches us that our worth is never ever determined by who we leave or who leaves us. It's determined by what we build in the rubble. She drove away from her old life in a broken-down car, but she returned having built a brand new one, all on her own terms. What did you think of Elara's incredible transformation? Have you ever had a moment where you had to completely rebuild your life from scratch? Let us know your story in the comments below. If you love this story of justice and empowerment, please don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own power. And for more dramatic stories every week, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss what we have coming next.